Fortunately for Shlomo Halevi for Rita. So now we're holding Samach Hey. That's 65B, a new parak. Elu Devarim bePesach Deichanas Shabbos. The following things on Pesach, they override the Shabbos. We're talking about that the 14th of Nisan, which is really Erev Pesach, but if that falls out on Shabbos, what are you allowed to do? Because that's the day that they brought the carbon Pesach. So it says, well, Shchitasai, the slaughtering of the carbon Pesach, that's performed on Shabbos. Zrikas Damei, the sprinkling of the blood. Michi Krava, this is cleaning out the innards. Baktaras Chalavov, and burning the fats. Are also, all of these are performed on Shabbos. The roasting and the rinsing of the innards, what we said before, which was accepted, that was, I guess, squeezing out the innards. But the rinsing of it, that wasn't allowed. Okay. What's the reason why not? Why is it not pushing off Shabbos? He said because those things can be performed after Shabbos, after nightfall. After nightfall, which would be the beginning of Pesach, the beginning of the Yom Tov. Erev Pesach again is Shabbos. Harkavasai means carrying the animal on your shoulders through Rosh Hashanah. And bringing it from outside the 2,000 amas. And cutting off a wart, which that would make a sacrifice invalid, but if you cut it off, it becomes valid. So Shabbos, these are things that don't push off the Shabbos, because carrying it, whether through Rosh Hashanah or from too far away, or cutting off the wart, all of that could have been done before Shabbos. Now, Rebbe Lezer, his opinion is always that anything that's involved with the mitzvah pushes off Shabbos. That's the famous chapter in Masechta Shabbos. Rebbe Lezer Demila, he holds making the knife for a bris is also, that you clearly could have done before Shabbos. But he holds that if it's involved with the mitzvah, it pushes off Shabbos. Amar Rebbe Lezer says, well, shouldn't it be logical? When it comes to slaughtering, which that's a real malacha, that's an av malacha, that's one of the 39. Deichas Shabbos, that overrides the Shabbos. There's no one questioned if you're allowed to shecht on Shabbos, the carbon Pesach. You're allowed to. So Elushim Mishum Shvus, these which are only rabbinic, L'yitchras Shabbos, they shouldn't push off the Shabbos. What's he referring to? The rabbinic carrying through Rosh Hashanah should be rabbinic because because a live animal, anything alive carries itself. It's only rabbinic that you can't. And cutting off the wart could be done in an abnormal manner. So why shouldn't it push off Shabbos? If the Daraisa pushes off Shabbos, what's forbidden biblically, it becomes permissible because of the holiday, because of the preparations for the holiday, because of the sacrifice. So rabbinic laws for sure should be. That's Rabbi Eliezer's Kal V'chomer. Rabbi Lezer here is Rabbi Lezer ben Horkenes. Amalei Rabbi Yeshua says to him, Yom Tov Yechiyah. What you're telling me is not a good Kal V'chomer. It's not real logic. Why? Because we see in another place where it happens exactly the opposite of the way you're saying. Sheitir by Mishum Malacha. They allowed you to do malachas, which is to cook, everything that you're allowed to do on Yom Tov. V'aser by Mishum Shvus. But they said that certain things are still forbidden. You can't carry outside the Tvam, even if it's alive. You can't carry in Rosh Hashanah. Well, actually, you do carry in Rosh Hashanah. So from outside the Tvam, even if tchumen is derabanan. That's machlekes. But even if tchumen is derabanan, you're not allowed to carry from outside the tchum on Yom Tov, and even though that's rabbinic, and they allow you to cook on Yom Tov. So you see the way of weighing this of, if the biblical law becomes permissible, even though usually that's strict. So for sure the rabbinic law should become permissible. You see that that's not so, because on Yom Tov, they allow the biblical law, the cooking, and they don't allow the rabbinic law. Amalei Rabbi Lezer responds to Rabbi Yeshua, Maze Yeshua. What is this Yeshua? Maraya Rishus L'Mitzvah. What's your proof? You're bringing a proof from something that's voluntary to something that's a mitzvah. When it comes to a mitzvah, so it overrides everything. So the mitzvah should override everything. If it overrides a biblical law, it should override the rabbinic law. Now you're telling me that, we see biblical laws become permissible but not rabbinic. That's by voluntary things. There's no one says you have to do that. No one says you have to carry this animal. If it's just a voluntary, you have to eat that animal, go either bring it before Yom Tov or eat another animal. But here, where it's a mitzvah and it overrides the biblical law, for sure it should override the rabbinic law. Eshev Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva interjects. You see, this was an argument between Rabbi Lezer and Rabbi Yeshua, and now Rabbi Akiva was actually a student of theirs, but then he rose to the level of a friend as well. He responds, sprinkling of the red heifer, of the paraduma, for someone that's impure, that should prove that Rabbi Yeshua is correct. Shemisham mitzvah. You see, if a person is tamei and it's Erev Pesach, and Erev Pesach is the 7th day, so the 7th day of his purification process, you could sprinkle the water of the paraduma on him and he would be pure, and that night he could eat from the Korban Pesach. The only problem is if that Erev Pesach, that 7th day, happens to be Shabbos as well. So that's a mitzvah because he would end up that evening being able to eat the Korban Pesach. The only problem is sprinkling the water on him. There's a rabbinic prohibition of that, performing that on Shabbos. We started on Sunday, not on Shabbos. So what's the rabbinic prohibition? It's called Masakin Gabra. It's fixing the person. It's like someone Tamnei wasn't supposed to use the mikveh. We use the mikveh on Shabbos because it's not really significant for any practical laws. It's just increasing holiness. But if it would actually be Masakin Gavra, that would be an issue. If it would actually be fixing a person. So here, sprinkling the water of the paradum on him would be Masakin Gavra. It's a rabbinic prohibition. And it doesn't push off the Shabbos. Where he gets this from is unclear. But he's saying, look, Rabbi Akiva is telling Rabbi Eliezer. He says, I'm showing you an example of something that's a mitzvah that doesn't push off Shabbos, even though it's only rabbinic law. Rabbi Eliezer was adamant that if there's a mitzvah there and it pushes off a daraisa, a biblical law, a biblical prohibition of Shabbos, like for example, shechting the Korban Pesach, the mitzvah of the Korban Pesach pushes off overrides the prohibition of Shabbos not to shech. So for sure, anything rabbinic that comes along with that, the Korban Pesach should override. That was Rabbi Eliezer's logic. Rabbi Shua responded that we see that it's not so. We see that there's biblical laws that are allowed. For example, on Yom Tov, you're allowed to cook, but you're not allowed to do other rabbinic laws. You can't carry from outside the Tchum on Yom Tov, even though that's only rabbinic. So Rabbi Eliezer responded, yeah, he says, because that's not a mitzvah. But if it's a mitzvah, it's 100% that anything that's permissible biblically should be also permissible rabbinically, which the logic is there. So comes along Rabbi Akiva and says, 1 second, I'll show you an example of something that's only rabbinic and it's prohibited. And that example is Hazah, sprinkling the water of the red heifer, which is part of the purification process, and it's a mitzvah because it would allow this individual to eat the korban pesach that night. He said, so, if that's what you see by the sprinkling of the red heifer, that it's prohibited on Shabbos, so don't be surprised about those other things that are also only rabbinic, that they're not allowed on Shabbos. Amalei Rebbe Lezer. Rebbe Lezer says to him, he has a great answer. He says, "Valani done. That's exactly what I judge, what I rule on. That exact case that you brought me as a proof for you, that hazah, sprinkling of the water of the red heifer, doesn't push off Shabbos, and so therefore that's a proof that rabbinic laws of Shabbos don't get overridden, are not pushed off." Rabbi Lezer says that exact halacha that you bring me, I hold that it does get pushed off. I hold that you're allowed to sprinkle the blood, sprinkle the water of the paraduma on this person to allow him to eat from the korban pesach that evening. So the support that Rabbi Akiva brought, Rabbi Eliezer rejects by saying, I hold exactly the opposite of that. You have no support. You have no proof against me. For yourself, that's maybe fine, but that's not doesn't tell me anything. Amalei Rabbi Akiva says to him, maybe you should say the opposite. If hazah, sprinkling the water of the paraduma, which is rabbinic, doesn't push off Shabbos, that's Rabbi Akiva's opinion. So shchita, slaughtering, which is biblical, for sure shouldn't push off Shabbos. Amalei Rebbe Lezer. Rebbe Lezer says back, Akiva. It's like surprised. Akarta masha kasav b'Torah. You're uprooting what the Torah says. B'mayadai, bein b'chol, bein b'Shabbos. Rabbi Akiva, what are you suggesting? That we don't bring the korban Pesach because that Erev Pesach was Shabbos? It says clearly in the Torah that you have to bring it in its time, and in its time means on Shabbos, even on Shabbos. Amalai responds back, makes it look like this was all a setup. He says, Rebbe, show me something that has a specific time like shchita does. In other words, the things that we were talking about, carrying the animal from outside the tchum, or cutting off a wart, which was rabbinic, does it say that I have to do that on Erev Pesach? It doesn't say that I have to do that. I could do that whenever, bring it before Pesach, cut off the wart before Pesach. You're telling me that shchita is performed on Shabbos, okay, that it says in the Torah, it's performed on Shabbos. Klal Amar Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva gives a rule. Kol malacha shefshel aseisim erev Shabbos. Any malacha that was possible to do from erev Shabbos, ein adeichas Shabbos. You can't do it on Shabbos. Shchita, sheyefshel aseisim erev Shabbos, deichas Shabbos. But the slaughtering, the offering of the sacrifice, that cannot have been done erev Shabbos, because that would have been on the 13th of Nisan. And the korban pesach needs to be brought on the 14th, which was Shabbos. So that pushes up Shabbos.
There's quite a lot of dialogue in here for a Mishnah.
Yeah.
Do the commentaries say why?
It feels like it's a sefta. It feels like like an unedited I'm not sure. I think it goes on. I don't remember the Mishnah after this. No, it doesn't go on. It is surprising. It is surprising. It's a lot of information. Yeah. It does. This Mishnah does stick out. Okay, Tana Rabbanan. The rabbi studied in the Brisa. Halachas in the Salma b'nei B'seira. This halacha was forgotten by b'nei B'seira. If you remember, there was a Gemara. About if you blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah on Shabbos in front of a bezdin. It says in Yerushalayim you were allowed to, right? In the Mikdash you were allowed to. What about in front of the bezdin? So the Bnei B'seira asked Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said, let's first blow and we'll discuss it later. And it was probably right after the Churban, and the question was, what status does the Sanhedrin have? Anyway, the Bnei B'seira was a very important family of Rabbanim. Maybe Rabbi Yehuda ben B'seira is one of them, let's assume. And they had this question: do you bring the Korban Pesach on Shabbos? So Pamachas, the Bnei B'seira forgot the halacha. Pamachas chalar b'asaliyas b'Shabbos. One time, the 14th of Nisan was on Shabbos. Shachachu v'layada and Pesach deichas Shabbos and Lav. They forgot. What do you do? Do you bring the Korban Pesach on Shabbos or not? The commentators discuss how it's possible for them to forget this, because it's got to be once in 20 years, 19 years, whatever, that it falls on Shabbos. So it's two possibilities. One possibility is, three possibilities. One possibility is that this was orchestrated by God for them to forget because of what's going to happen right afterwards. But we'll see. The second possibility is that when the Bezdin was Makadosh the month, it could be that many years passed and it never fell on Shabbos because they didn't have to specifically follow the calendar the way we have it set up. Another possibility is that the Bezdin that was before was run by Sadducees, by the Tzedukim. And just because what they did it last time doesn't mean that was really the halacha. There was corruption going on. So whatever happened, the Bezdin is taken over by the Perushim, by the Rabbanan, and or the Beis Hamikdash, whatever. And now the question is, what's the correct way of doing this? We don't know what happened before. It doesn't mean anything because they followed the same. They effectively followed it, and even much longer. If they saw that the testimony was going to be going, unless they were different following around, right? They would. Right. Avram Nassim saying he doesn't like the second answer. Okay. The whole category of the guy is very talented. Would have said in the Torah that he did 1,000 years before. So we remember all the Torah we heard about from 10 years ago. Well, you don't have to see the people. Right. You remember, right. Guys knew everything the Torah after the phone. Right. Right. It's very hard to understand. So, Amru, they said, "Klum yishadam sheidei and Pesach deichas Shabbos and Lav." Is there anyone around that knows if Pesach pushes up Shabbos or not? Amru lahem. They said to the Bnei B'seira, "Adam echad yeshalam miBavel." There is a fellow. He just came up from Babylonia. The Hillel HaBavli Shmai. His name is Hillel HaBavli. This is Hillel. Hillel HaZakin was called Hillel HaBavli. Sheshimish Negdei Adar Shmai Avtalion. He studied under Shmai and Avtalion, the two great people of the generation. And he knows the answer. I don't know how they know that he knows specifically this answer. That's what they said. Shalchu, they sent. The Karolai, they called him. Do you know if Pesach pushes up Shabbos? That means if Erev Pesach is Shabbos, are you allowed to shech the Korban Pesach? Do you have Pesach once a year that pushes off Shabbos? We have more than 200 Pesach sacrifices every year that push off Shabbos. He doesn't mean actually the Korban Pesach. He means other sacrifices. He says, they said, where do you get this from? That word that says that you bring the sacrifice in its time is said by the Korban Pesach, and it's also said by the Korban Tamid. When it comes to the Korban Tamid, it says you push off the Shabbos. So when it says Mayed by the Korban Pesach, it also means that it pushes off the Shabbos. So that was his first proof to them that because the Korban Tamid is shechted on Shabbos, the Korban Pesach should also be shechted on Shabbos. And the word that's used for the Tamid is the same as used for the Korban Pesach. Right, Kal v'chaimer. It's also logical. Besides for the Gezerah Shava, besides for the word is the same, but also the Korban Tamid is not onish karis. It's not brought. It doesn't incur the karis punishment. Pesach shanas karis in adin shadeichas Shabbos. When it comes to the Korban Pesach, it's the one of the only positive commandments that incurs karis. So if it's so strict, then for sure it should push off Shabbos. It should be performed on Shabbos. Miyad heshivu b'reish minui nasi aleim. They immediately put him as the head of the Sanhedrin. And he was teaching the whole day, Hilchas Pesach. This was used as an example of humility that the Bnei Beseira had. They saw that someone knew the halacha better than them. They stepped down and they put Hillel in charge, which is rare for people to do that. Just to give up their authority and say, okay, we have a better teacher than us.
It's interesting because that's often discussed as the great excuse of his descendant Hillel the Last. That he had the humility to create a fixed calendar which removed his chashivas.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting.
Because that was what the main authority that was left to the main authority that was left to the Sanhedrin at the time, and by doing it, he diminished himself and his role.
Do you remember who spoke about that? Who brings that out?
Well, I know where I read it, which is in that relatively new Art Scroll book.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Very nice. Very nice. So this is brought here as a humility of the Bnei Beseira. However, look what happens. He begins to chastise them. The Hillel, Amar Lahem, he says to them, who caused that I should come up from Babel and now become your leader? It's your own laziness. You didn't study under Shmai Vav Talyan. So he starts to tell them that they should have been learning harder. They should have gone to a different teacher. I don't know exactly the politics back then, but he's telling the Bnei Beseira, you should have gone to study under Shmai Vav Talyan. Amrullah, they ask him another question. Rebbe, what happens if they don't bring a knife from Erev Shabbos? In other words, the shechita needs to be performed with a specific knife. It has to be prepared, properly. You can't just find any knife or whatever. Let's say they forgot to bring the knife to do the shechita. And I guess the little animal itself, they could walk it. The animal could walk. But what about the knife? What are they going to do? How do they get the knife there if it's on Shabbos? Is there an Erev? Maybe there's no Erev. So, Amalehem, halacha shamati v'shechachti. Amazing. He says, I knew this halacha, but I forgot it. This is Hillel. After he just yells at the Bnei B'Seira that they didn't learn hard enough, and that's why they forgot the halacha. He has to respond. We'll see, the Gemara is going to point this out. He has to respond that I knew, but I forgot. Amar Hanach Lam Yisrael, Emein Neviim, Hein Bnei Neviim Hein. Leave it up to the Jews. If they're not prophets, they're children of prophets. Lamachar, the following day, Misha Peschai Tzaleh, someone that was bringing a sheep, he put the knife into the wool of the sheep, because the wool of the sheep, the sheep is very thick, and you can hold the knife. They stick it in, and the knife came along, was carried by the sheep, not by the people. Misha Peschai Gedi. If it was, what do you do if it's a goat? You're allowed to bring a sheep or a goat. So Teichvei Ben Karnav, they stuck it between the horns, and it was able to go to be carried by within the horns. I'm not sure if the horn had a little curl on it, and they could stick it in. I don't know exactly, or between the horn. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, Avram Nosson suggesting not to do that. It says it could cause a mum. If it slips, it could cause a mum. Okay. He saw the way the people did this. You see, the people did this on their own. No one instructed them to do this. They said, oh, they figured this out, or this is how they did it. And then he says, yeah, this is exactly what I heard from Shmaya Vavtalion, that's how you get the knife to the Beis Hamikdash. Okay. That's this brisa that we quote based on our Mishnah. The Mishnah was about what activities could be performed on Shabbos, that's Erev Pesach. We have a background story from the brisa that talks about can you bring the Korban Pesach on Shabbos? That was what the Bnei B'Seira forgot, and then Hillel told them that yes, you can. He based it on the Korban Tamid, and then how to get the knife there. Amar Mar. The master taught. We go back to discuss the brisa. Nemar mayadai b'Pesach v'nemar mayadai b'Tamid. It says mayadai by Pesach, and it says mayadai in its time by the Korban Tamid. Ma mayadai amar b'Tamid deichas Shabbos. Kach mayadai amar Pesach deichas Shabbos. That was the quote from the brisa. That the mayadai tells me that it's performed on Shabbos in its time, even not on Shabbos. So too, the Korban Pesach is brought even if Erev Pesach is Shabbos. But Tamid Gufei Minala the Dachi Shabbos. The Gemara asks, how do we know the Tamid was what overrides Shabbos? How do you know that Korban Tamid is brought on Shabbos? If it's because it says the word Mayadai, Pesach Nami Yaksibei Mayadai. By Pesach it also says Mayadai. The only way that we got that Pesach puts us off Shabbos is because it says Mayadai by the Tamid, and it says Mayadai by the Pesach. You see, it pushes off Shabbos. But if Mayadai itself teaches me that it pushes off Shabbos, then why do I have to discuss the Korban Tamid? It must be that I know something about the Korban Tamid, and I'm using the word Mayadai to tell me that what applied to the Korban Tamid is going to also apply to the Korban Pesach. But how do I know the Korban Tamid pushes off Shabbos? Mayadai doesn't tell it to me. So if that's the case, the Mayadai by the Korban Pesach doesn't tell it to me. I have to know some specifically from a Mayadai by the Korban Pesach doesn't tell it to me. The Mayadai by the Korban Tamid doesn't tell me. I have to know specifically that this from a different source that the Korban Tamid is brought on Shabbos. Pasuk says that the Oila of Shabbos in its time, probably referring to the Korban Musaf, besides for the Korban Tamid. Besides for the Korban Tamid. You see, the Korban Musaf is brought on Shabbos. The Korban Tamid is also brought on Shabbos. Mechlal, Oila the Tamid Korban b'Shabbos. You see clearly that the Korban Tamid was brought on Shabbos. Yeah, for some reason we couldn't have learned directly from the Karban Musaf. I don't know why. I guess because we needed a Gzeir Shavah. We needed the word to be the verbal analogy. I need a word by the Talmud that's the same word by the Karban Pesach. Okay. Amar Mar. We go back to discuss another segment of the Brisa. It says, Va'id Kal V'chaimer. Also, besides for this, it's also a Kal V'chaimer. Ma tamid shein leinan shkaris deichas Shabbos. Pesach shein shkaris in adin shedeichas Shabbos. To Kal V'chaimer. If the Karban Tamid doesn't incur the karis punishment, but Pesach does, and the Tamid pushes off Shabbos, for sure the Pesach pushes off Shabbos. It says, Ikal Miprach, 1 second. You can ask on this, a very strong question. Malo Tamid Shkin Tada V'Kalo. You could say that the reason why the Karban Tamid pushes off Shabbos is, first of all, it's every day. So we should never stop that. And second of all, it's entirely burnt. The Karban Pesach was eaten. So this is specifically something that's burnt for Hashem, that it maybe is acceptable, but that's the Karban Tamid is an Oila. It's entirely burnt. But the Karban Pesach, how do you know that should push off Shabbos? In other words, the Karban Tamid has a uniqueness to it. We're saying, the fact that the Karban Pesach is kares, that shouldn't tell us that everything should be allowed. So how do you know? And, it has one thing that's unique to it, that it has kares, but the Karban Tamid has other things. So, what's the Kal V'chaimer? Kal V'chaimer Amalu Bereisha Parchua V'Adam L'Gzeir Shavah. The Gemara explains that actually the way the Brisa quoted it was a little bit out of order. Originally, Hillel tells them the Kal V'chaimer. Tells them, look, if a Karban Tamid is brought on Shabbos and it doesn't have kares, for sure the Karban Pesach should be brought on Shabbos. The Karban Pesach has kares. So they said, how is that a Kal? The Bnei B'Seir tell Hillel, how is that a Kal V'chaimer? The Karban Tamid is entirely burnt. The Karban Tamid is brought every day. They said, you're right. And then he tells them the Gzeir Shavah. It says by the Karban Tamid b'mayadai, it says by the Karban Pesach b'mayadai, and that they have to accept. The Gzeir Shavah you can't ask a question on. Well, you can, sort of. Depends if it's how open it is. So now that it says v'chim yachid the Gzeir Shavah Kal V'chaimer lamali. So what do you do with the Kal V'chaimer if you learned from the Gzeir Shavah? Why do we need the Kal V'chaimer? Ela lidid to kamalo. Bishleim Gzeir Shavah legamrisu. They not done Gzeir Shavah miatzmai. Ela Kal V'chaimer done miatzmai bailachul meidan. He tells them like this. Look, you don't have the Gzeir Shavah. I have it. Gzeir Shavah needs to be, Gzeir Shavah is when I find two words that are the same. That comparison, that verbal analogy, I have the same word in both locations. And that teaches me halacha that applies to one, applies to the other. That needs to be received as a tradition from the teacher. Hillel says, I have that tradition. You don't have that tradition, so I can't help you. But however, I do have the Kal V'chaimer for you. And the Kal V'chaimer, that you see, it's logical, that you should be able to accept. So they said that the Kal V'chaimer doesn't fit. So he has to fall back on his own tradition that he has. Okay. They respond to him like Kal V'chaimer Pricho, they respond to him that the Kal V'chaimer is not good. Yeah, what's the story over here with, why can't they just accept the Gzeir Shavah from him? Why does he have to tell them that, according to me, I have a Gzeir Shavah, but you don't have the Gzeir Shavah? Why does he have to say that? He could just say, I have the Gzeir Shavah, accept it from me. I'll be your teacher for the day. Okay, I don't know. Amar Mar. Go back to discuss another piece of the Brisa. The master taught, if the Karban Pesach was a sheep, you put it in the wool. If it's a goat, you put it between the horns. We're talking about the knife. The Gemara asks on top of Samach Vav Amud Beis, but you're doing service with the sacrifice. You're doing work with the sacrifice. You're not allowed to do personal work with the sacrifice. We learned this by Bechar, that you're not allowed to work a firstborn animal, which is going to be a sacrifice. And here you're having the animal carry for you something. The Gemara says Ki Hillel. We're following the words of Hillel. Actually, it was Hillel himself. The Tanya Amra Laval Hillel Miyama Bleimal Adam Bailasai Ela Mivia Chum Lazara Maktisha V'Semich Yadi Ela V'Sheichta. The people followed Hillel's example. Hillel was very concerned about the Me'ilah, someone having benefit from things that belong to the temple. So what he would do with the sacrifices, and I guess people in his that what followed him, this is what they would do, is they would bring the animal unconsecrated, without being sanctified. They would bring it to the temple, and then in the temple they would sanctify it. If that's the case, then any work that was done with the sacrifice beforehand would not be considered me'ilah, because it wasn't consecrated. It was right before the shechita, he would sanctify it, and then they would shecht it, so that he would avoid any problems of having this animal hanging around. He would maybe designate it, but it wouldn't be consecrated until it was right there, ready to be shechted. There's a little bit of a problem here, because it says, the expression is, Mevia chulin la'azara. You would bring chulin into azara. Now that's a prohibition. You're not allowed to bring chulin into the azara. I would have liked it to say, like, Mevia chulin ad la'azara. That would have resolved it, but it doesn't actually say that. And I think Tosfos is bothered by this. Yeah. Yeah, I guess it was okay. Can't shecht chulin ba'azara, but I guess you're allowed to bring it in. Okay, so the Gemara says now, so okay, we have a solution. The solution is that they were using the animal to carry the knife. The animal is a sacrifice. You're not allowed to use the sacrifice. We said no, the animal wasn't a sacrifice. They made it into a sacrifice later. Now, what day is it? Obviously, it's Erev Pesach and it's Shabbos. It says Pesach b'Shabbos eichem matzimaktishle. You're not allowed to consecrate an animal on Shabbos. But Tanan ein makdishin vein marichin vein machrim vein magvian shuma ma'asos kolela b'yom tov amru kal v'chemer b'Shabbos. You're not allowed to do any of these things on Shabbos. You're not allowed to sanctify. You're not allowed to evaluate someone's what his if someone donates his value to the temple, or the value of other things. You're not allowed to separate truma. You're not allowed to separate maestros on Yom Tov, and for sure you're not allowed to do it on Shabbos. So this solution has a problem with it. The Gemara says, those were dedications that didn't have a set time. So we say do it any other time. But over here, where it has a designated time, Shabbos, well, it's not the designated time, isn't Shabbos, it happens to be Shabbos, but it's a designated time for Erev Pesach, so you're allowed to consecrate it on Shabbos as well. Rabbi Yochanan says it clearly, that a person can consecrate his sacrifice on Shabbos, Korban Pesach on Shabbos, and his Chagiga can consecrate on Yom Tov. Now, you can't consecrate the Pesach on Yom Tov, because that would be impossible. Because which Yom Tov? If it's Pesach already, then you can't bring the Korban Pesach. The only time would be last Sukkot. That wouldn't be realistic. So yeah, Hanukkah and Purim don't count. So it says Pesach on Shabbos, right? And the Chagiga, that was a sacrifice that was brought on Yom Tov. And that could be consecrated on Yom Tov. V'alei mechamer, 1 second. There's a problem of causing an animal to walk with a load on it. Your animals need to keep Shabbos as well. Ato vincha vitecha avdecha v'amascha v'emtecha, right? Your animals need to keep Shabbos. One of the things on Shabbos is carrying, and that's one of the work. And you're not allowed to make your animal carry either. Well, it's rabbinic, but it's called mechamer, causing the animal to carry. The Gemara says, well, mechamer kalachiyad. He's doing it in an abnormal way. Now, the abnormal way here is that usually a donkey or something would carry a load. Here you're having a sheep or a goat carry something, that's odd. And that's not considered a real malacha. Okay, so it's not a Issa Daraisa. But it's also Midrabanan. Places points out, when we learned about someone that was walking with his wallet, and it was becoming Shabbos, we had these solutions of that he puts it on his animal. If he had someone with him, he gives it to the person that's with him. Otherwise, he puts it on his animal. How does he put it on the animal? It's going to cause the animal to, what he does is, while the animal starts walking, he puts it on it. So it never had an akira. It wasn't a real akira. And then he takes it off before the animal stops. So we could have said that same answer over here as well. So the Gemara says, "Hainu de kabayimine davar sheish lehetem in atayra v'davar shvusay milafanav la'akri kalachiyad b'makam mitzvah mai." He says this is exactly the question. The question was, can you do something kalachiyad when there's a mitzvah there? Can you do a malacha kalachiyad in a makkah mitzvah? Does the makkah mitzvah push off this rabbinic law of doing this malacha kalachiyad? Amalahen. So that was the question of the Bnei Beseira, and Hillel responds, halacha du shemati v'shachachti. I forgot the halacha. Let them do it as without saying anything, and if they're not prophets themselves, the children of prophets, and it will come to them what's supposed to be done correctly will be done. That's how they'll do it. I'm Rav Yudah Merav. Yeah, I don't know how that worked. Avram Nassan's asking, how did it work with the knives? Couldn't they borrow a knife from the Beis Hamikdash? Or someone in the Beis Hamikdash should have had. Everyone needs to bring their own knife.
Well, there were so many going on. We learned.
Oh, maybe they had to shecht it all at the same time.
Thousands. We only had 3 kitas.
Right, 3 groups with 600,000 pairs of kidneys. Right? Okay. Maybe it wasn't a shechita now. Oh, because that they could have used as that, they could have used for after Shabbos, you're right. Okay. Rav Yudah Merav. Rav Yudah says in the name of Rav, Kol HaMisyar, anyone that's arrogant, Im chacham hu chachmasim mistalekas mimenu. If he's wise, his wisdom leaves him. Im navihu, if he's a prophet, nivuasim mistalekas mimenu. His prophecy leaves him. Im chacham hu chachma mistalekas mimenu. If he's wise, his wisdom leaves him. Me Hillel. We learn this from Hillel. Damar Mar, because the master taught in the Brisa, Ischal Mekantrim B'dvarim, he started to chastise the Bnei Beseira, Kamalu, halacha zu shemati v'shachachti. Immediately, right afterwards, he says, I forgot the halacha. That was a type of arrogance when he started to give them musar that you should have learned by Shmaya Vavtalion, and then immediately he has to admit that he doesn't remember the halacha. It's interesting because Hill was always known as the humble, right? Yeah, maybe after this. No, it says about the school of Hillel and the Sinisik. And it speaks about the Hillel himself, and also speaks about his also by the converts. It speaks about Hillel wasn't known, right? And then it speaks about how he never got angry, right? And then it speaks about students of Hillel would always say Shammai's opinions first. Okay, Im Naviyu Nevasim Mistalex Meno, if it's a prophet, the prophecy leaves him midvaira. That we learn from Dvaira. Iksiv Chadlu Parazain Bi Yisrael Chadelu At Shekamti Dvaira Shekamti Em Bi Yisrael. This is in the song of Dvaira. It says that times were getting tough. The people stopped living in the villages. People in the villages stopped until I get up. I got up as a mother in Israel, and this is part of her song. Okay, so it's very nice. So, however, it says Uksiv Uri Devaira Uri Dabri Shir, speak or wake up Devaira, wake up and say song. That means that she wasn't able to say the prophecy. She had to be encouraged to get the prophecy back because she spoke with haughtiness. Rish Lakish says, Kala Adam Shekayas. I don't know if it's Rish Lakish or Reb Levi. Does anyone have it spelled out in their Gemara? It's probably Rish Lakish. Before it was Rav Yudah Marav. Anyone that gets angry, if he's wise, then his wisdom leaves him. Very similar to what Rabbi Yudah Marav said. Just Rabbi Yudah Marav said it about arrogance. He says it about anger. Because a prophet, the prophecy leaves him. If he's wise, his wisdom leaves him. Moshe gets angry at the generals of the soldiers. And right after that, is talking about by the war with Midian. They brought back the girls. They bring them back. He says this is what the whole cause of the war. You shouldn't bring them back alive. And then it says, Elazar then teaches the following halacha about how to kasher vessels. They need to be purged in water or in fire if they were used in fire. What happened to Moshe? Moshe usually teaches halachas. All of a sudden we have Elazar teaching the halacha. Moshe forgot the halacha. The truth is, there was another source where Moshe gets angry at Elazar, where he gets angry at the sons of Aaron that they didn't eat a certain sacrifice. And the Gemara says, when he got angry, he forgot he made a mistake. Okay, I'm not sure why he brings this one instead of that one. If he's a prophet, his prophecy leaves him Elisha. This is from Elisha. What happened was there was a war that was Moav used to pay a tax to Achav. And it was 100,000 sheep or 100,000 other thing. And Achav dies and his son Yehoram takes over. And then Yehoram wants to go to war. He gets together with Yehoshaphat and together with the king of Edom, I think. And he says, let's go. And it turns out that they didn't have any water. And so they said, we're going to fall into the hands of Moav. And Yehoshaphat says, there's got to be a prophet here somewhere. So someone says, yeah, there's Elisha. He was the one that served Eliyahu. He's a prophet. So Yehoram sends for him. He comes, and Elisha tells him, he says, I wouldn't even look at you. Your father, or go talk to the idols of your father or of your mother, whatever. He says, if not for Yehoshaphat, I wouldn't even come here to talk to him. Yehoshaphat was the king of Yehuda. Yehoram was the king of Yisrael. There were two kingdoms, the north and the south. So, but they were joined. Yehoshaphat was friendly with them, and he was going to assist them in the battle. So he speaks arrogantly to Yehoram. He wasn't able to say prophecy. He has to call for the musician to come so that he should get the prophecy. Amar Rav Mani bar Patish kol shekayis afilu pesach v'dulim min hashamayim marid noisei. Rav Mani bar Patish says anyone that gets angry, even if he was supposed to have greatness from heaven, they take it away from him. Minolan me'aliyav. This is from David's brother. David's brother, his name was Eliyav. Shenemar v'yichar af Eliyav b'David yamar lama ze yiradata v'almina tashta ma'atat zayin. Tahena b'midbar ani yadati yasadoin chav Yisrael avavcha k'leman reisim ulchama yiradata. What happened was Yishai, the father of David, sends David down to his brothers that are at battle. And he says, take this bread or this corn, whatever, grain, take it down to your brothers. When he goes down to the battle, he hears Goliath shouting against the Jewish people, against Hashem. And he says, what is this? Anyone that can come fight? He says, I'm going to go fight. So the people are ready to let David fight with Goliath. And Eliav says, what are you doing here? Who did you leave your sheep with? We know you just came here. You just came here just to check out the battle, just to see what's going on. You're just curious. Anyway, Shmuel comes to the children of Yishai. He's looking for the one that he's supposed to anoint. So they send him another son. Each one he says, this is not the one that Hashem chose. The Baliyav Ksiv, Vayemer Hashem el Shmuel, al Tabed el Maria Valgeva Kamasaki. Don't look at his height. Don't look at his appearance, because he was rejected. Not that he wasn't chosen. He was rejected. That meant that he was beloved until now. That means, I don't know if it means it could have been the king, but whatever the case is, that he wouldn't have been rejected. Now he gets rejected, which is a stronger expression, and it's because he got angry at David. Okay, let's leave it over here.